It was a quiet night in New Jersey. Outside the window, snowflakes were falling, covering the streets in silence. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, in a dimly lit room, an old man lay in bed. His name was Richard Miller, a 68-year-old retired Army veteran. Once strong, once proud, now half of his body refused to move. His left arm was dead weight, his legs useless, his face frozen on one side. But that wasn't the real pain. The real pain was in his heart, because the only person he trusted, the only family he had left in this world, his daughter Emily, was no longer there. Richard's eyes stared at the ceiling, but in his mind, scenes from the past kept playing like an old movie reel. He remembered the day Emily was born, the joy in his wife's eyes, the laughter in their small suburban home in Newark. His wife passed away when Emily was just 10 years old, and from that moment on, Richard had been both father and mother to her. He worked double shifts, saved every penny, cooked her breakfast before school, and stayed awake all night when she was sick. For Richard, Emily wasn't just a daughter. She was his world, his reason to live. Richard had served his country proudly. 25 years in the U.S. Army, through sleepless nights, cold deserts, and bloody wars. When he retired, the government handed him a pension and a medal, but what mattered most to him was the future he could give Emily. He bought a small 2-story house in a quiet American neighborhood. White fence, a little garden, a swing in the yard, just like the American dream he always wanted. On weekends, he grilled burgers in the backyard while Emily laughed and played. On Sundays, they went to church together. People in the neighborhood often said, "That Miller guy, he's a hero. And his daughter? She's lucky to have him." But Richard didn't think Emily was lucky. He thought he was the lucky one for having her. He promised himself, no matter what happens, Emily will never struggle. She will never know the pain I knew. I'll make sure of that. Years passed. Emily grew into a smart, beautiful young woman. She went to college in New York, studied business, and often told her father, "One day, Dad, I'll make you proud. I'll build my own company. We'll never have to worry about money again." Richard smiled every time she said that. He believed her. Why wouldn't he? She was his daughter, his flesh and blood. But something changed when she met Adam, a charming young man with slick hair, fast cars, and dreams bigger than his wallet. Adam wasn't like Richard. He didn't believe in hard work or sacrifice. He believed in shortcuts, fast money, quick thrills, and living large. Richard noticed the change. Emily stopped spending weekends at home. She started asking for money more often. "Dad, I need it for college books. Dad, rent is high in New York. Dad, just this one time." Richard gave her everything. He didn't ask questions. Because in his mind, a father's duty was simple. Sacrifice, no matter the cost. But deep down, he felt the first crack in their bond. A silent fear whispered to him at night. What if one day she forgets what you gave up for her? Then it happened. One cold December morning, while Richard was walking back from the grocery store, his vision blurred. The world spun. His body collapsed onto the icy sidewalk. Neighbors rushed to help. An ambulance screamed through the streets, carrying him to the hospital. Half of his body was paralyzed. The doctors said recovery would take years, maybe forever. He couldn't work, couldn't walk without help, couldn't even feed himself properly. For the first time in his life, Richard felt weak, vulnerable, helpless. But he wasn't afraid because he believed Emily would be there for him. She was his daughter. She loved him. She wouldn't let him suffer alone. Or so he thought. The night before his surgery, Richard sat in his hospital bed, holding Emily's hand. His voice was shaky but full of trust. "Emily, all the money I saved, all the pension checks, everything. It's in the account under my name. I wrote your name as my legal heir. If something happens to me, you'll handle it. But promise me you'll use it for my treatment, for the house, for our future." Emily looked into his tired eyes and whispered, "Of course, Dad. I promise." Richard smiled. A tear rolled down his cheek. For him, that promise was stronger than any contract, stronger than any law. But what he didn't know was that Emily had already made a different promise. Not to her father, not to her family, but to Adam. Promise that would shatter Richard's world. The surgery was scheduled for Monday morning. Richard lay in his hospital bed, weak but hopeful. The doctors had explained everything. He would need months of therapy, expensive medicines, and constant care. But Richard wasn't worried. He had saved his entire life for this moment, for his safety net. And Emily had promised. On Tuesday afternoon, while Richard was asleep, Emily walked into the hospital with a folder in her hand. Inside were legal papers, bank forms, pension documents, authorization slips. She told the staff she was Richard's daughter, his heir, his caretaker. Nobody questioned her. After all, she had the same last name, and her father had signed her name as beneficiary. By evening, the transfer was done. Every penny Richard had saved, his pension fund, retirement savings, and the emergency medical account was gone. Not a single dollar was left. When Richard woke up the next morning, he asked the nurse, "Has Emily been here? Did she bring the soup she promised?" The nurse looked down, uncomfortable. She didn't have the heart to tell him. By then, Emily and Adam were already at Newark Airport, boarding a flight to Paris. They weren't looking back. They weren't answering calls. They weren't thinking about the man lying in the hospital bed, waiting for his daughter's smile. For Richard, the betrayal didn't hit all at once. At first he thought, maybe she got busy. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she'll come tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. 1 week later, Richard finally heard the truth from a family friend. "Richard, I don't know how to say this. Emily, she emptied your account. She's gone. She left with Adam. I'm so sorry." For a moment, the world stopped. Richard's mind replayed every sacrifice he had ever made. The nights he went hungry so Emily could eat, the double shifts he worked so she could buy books, the medals he sold so she could pay rent. And now, this? A scream rose inside him, but his paralyzed body couldn't release it. All he could do was stare at the ceiling, tears burning his eyes, whispering the only word that mattered. "Why? Emily, why?" That night, Richard lay awake in his hospital bed, the machines beeping softly. Outside, snow covered the streets again. He realized something dark, something sharp, something he had never felt before. Love had failed him. Sacrifice had failed him. Trust had failed him. But there was one thing left. And in that silent, cold room, Richard Miller made a promise. Not to his daughter, not to Adam, not to God. He made a promise to himself. "They took my money. They took my faith. But they will never take my justice. Not while I'm alive." Weeks turned into months. Richard remained in the hospital, his body weak but his mind sharper than ever. Every therapy session was torture. His legs refused to move. His left arm dangled like a dead branch, and every step felt like climbing a mountain with broken bones. But he pushed, again and again and again. The nurses admired his willpower. "Most patients give up, Mr. Miller," one of them said. "But you keep fighting. Why?" Richard didn't answer. He simply looked at the ceiling, his jaw tight. Deep inside, he knew the truth. He wasn't fighting just to walk again. He was fighting to stand tall enough to face Emily and Adam. Every bead of sweat, every tear, every painful scream in therapy was not just recovery. It was training, a soldier's training, for war. But at night, When the hospital went quiet and the halls turned dark, Richard's demons visited him. He dreamed of Emily's childhood, her tiny hand holding his, her laughter echoing in their backyard, her first day at school. And then the dream would twist. Emily walking away, boarding a plane, her hand in Adam's, her eyes cold. He would wake up drenched in sweat, whispering, "Why, Emily, why?" Every time he whispered those words, his heart broke a little more. But along with the pain came something else. Something sharper. Something darker. After 6 months, Richard was discharged. He could walk slowly with a cane. His speech was still heavy, but his mind was clear. Instead of going back to his empty house, he moved into a veterans community center, a place where broken soldiers rebuilt their lives. There, he met men who had seen war, men who had lost families, men who knew betrayal not by blood, but by governments and promises. They looked at Richard, and in his eyes, they recognized the same fire. One of them, a grizzled Marine named Carter, told him, "Son, you're not just healing your body, you're sharpening your weapon. Betrayal doesn't kill a man, it forges him." Richard nodded. For the first time since his stroke, he felt like a soldier again. One evening, Richard sat in the common room of the center, staring at the news on TV. His hand trembled, not from weakness, but from rage. There on the screen, in a travel segment, he saw a picture of Paris nightlife. And there, in the crowd, blurry but unmistakable, was Emily. Her arm wrapped around Adam's neck, smiling, holding a glass of champagne. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't guilty. She was celebrating. That night, Richard whispered again. But this time, not why. This time, he whispered, "I'm coming." Richard wasn't the same man anymore. The weak, paralyzed father was gone. What stood now was a soldier reborn, scarred, slower, but unbreakable. With the help of his veteran friends, he started tracing Emily and Adam's trail. Old Army contacts, legal advisors, and online investigators all gave him pieces of the puzzle. And the puzzle led to Paris. Emily and Adam had rented a luxury apartment near the Champs-Élysées. They lived off Richard's savings like royalty, designer clothes, expensive cars, champagne nights. The money that was meant to heal a father's body was now poisoning his daughter's soul. Richard booked his ticket. It wasn't just a journey across the ocean. It was a march to justice. On a rainy evening in Paris, Richard stood across the street from a glowing restaurant. Through the glass windows, he saw Emily and Adam laughing, raising glasses, celebrating. For a moment, his heart broke again. This was his little girl, the child who once called him hero. And now, she laughed with the man who had poisoned her against him. Richard walked inside. The cane in his hand tapped against the marble floor, echoing like war drums. The laughter at the table froze as Emily's eyes met his. Her face turned pale. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The restaurant went silent. Adam shifted uncomfortably, but Richard's gaze never left Emily's. "You took everything," Richard said, his voice low, raspy, but heavy with power. "My money, my trust, my love, and you left me to die." Emily's lips quivered. "Dad, I didn't mean." "Don't lie to me, Emily," Richard cut her off. His eyes burned with tears. "You didn't just betray me. You buried me alive." Richard didn't come unprepared. In his pocket were documents, bank statements, transfer records, proof of theft. With the help of international authorities and his veteran network, the case was ready. Adam tried to run, but 2 plainclothes officers waiting outside stopped him cold. Handcuffs clicked. The crowd in the restaurant gasped. Emily stood frozen, tears rolling down her face. "Dad, please." Richard looked at her one last time. His heart wanted to forgive, but his soul knew the truth. Forgiveness without justice is another betrayal. "You were my everything," he said softly, "and now you're nothing." The officers escorted Emily and Adam away. Weeks later, Richard returned to his quiet New Jersey home. The garden was overgrown, the swing rusted, the rooms empty. But this time he didn't feel helpless. He stood at the porch, cane in hand, the wind brushing against his face. He knew life had taken everything from him, his health, his peace, his daughter, but it hadn't taken his dignity. Looking straight into the night, Richard whispered, "They say blood is thicker than water, but betrayal cuts deeper than both. And justice is the only cure." This was the story of Richard Miller, a father betrayed by his only child, but a man who rose again to reclaim his dignity. Betrayal hurts, but justice heals. And sometimes, revenge isn't about anger, it's about survival. How far would you go if the one you loved the most was the one who destroyed you? Asterisk.